Hello, hi, welcome to Waterford Property Watch. I'm absolutely delighted to have my friend, our guest, Des Purcell here, Purcell Properties. You're very welcome, Des.
Regina, thank you. Delighted to be here.
Des, how many years are you in business?
I hate this. I arrived in Waterford to take a job with Stokes and Quirk, who had an office on the quay, and it was January 69, which means I'm in Waterford 50 years.
Well, you are flying, and you're one of the leading commercial estate agents in the southeast, Des?
Well, it's grown well, and we have, sort of the practice is a commercial and residential agency.
Yes.
We've worked it that way over the years.
Great. And isn't it very healthy to see two estate agents having a chat like this?
A sociable, friendly chat.
Absolutely. And I suppose, look, to give the nod to how we became friends was through Pieta House, and I work with Pieta House and
all of that.
And a great committee we've worked
with. And isn't it great to see Pieta doing the work it's doing in Waterford?
Absolutely.
Tragic, tough work, but it's
important.
It's very, very important to be there.
Absolutely. So Des, the Daft report came out today, and we were discussing, we do quite a bit of rental here in Liberty Blue, and would you be surprised to hear that Waterford is actually the cheapest place to rent out of the 5 cities in Ireland?
Well, yes, but not hugely, in the sense that I think it follows as day follows night, that the dearest place is Dublin and the second dearest place is Cork. Galway, for its own reasons, has always been an expensive-ish location for everything. Yes. It doesn't have huge, strong competing towns. We have Kilkenny 30 miles up the road, we have Wexford 40 miles down the road, we have Carlow an hour's drive. Galway doesn't have that, so it was always going to have the big draw in the west. So I'm not particularly surprised, Regina. It reflects, I think, accurately where we sit of the 5 major centres.
And I suppose the key message really is that, like, the average rent according to Q3 for Daft is that it's just over €1,000 compared to 1,200 in Limerick and 1,300 in Galway, and obviously Dublin, Shin Scale, Ella.
But isn't it interesting that Galway, with a population substantially smaller than Limerick, is dearer?
Yes.
And Galway has always had that edge.
I suppose I would feel anyway, the fact that it's university city, that is a key driver in that.
Yes.
And in terms then of, I suppose we were chatting about the affordability of Waterford, like we find quite a number of people migrating from Dublin to Waterford because it is the cost of living.
Value.
Yeah.
Well, Regina, a new 3-bed semi, give or take, depending on where you're buying, but you're in the range 230 to 250 for a 3-bed semi. And I think it has to be said that successive governments have created a situation where there is a specification and a level of finish. Your buyer of a 3-bed semi in Ireland, provincial Ireland today, or Ireland today, is getting a very, very good specification product in terms of insulation, in terms of security, in terms of construction standard. And for people who are the same house that you buy down here in the southeast for 240, 250 is 400 grand in Dublin.
Well, you wouldn't even get a 1-bed apartment for it, let's face it, for the same price.
Yeah.
And we were just chatting about the various schemes between Waterford City, Ferrybank and Tramore and John Maurice. There's like 12 new developments in the pipeline next year, Des, isn't that right?
There will be, for the first time in a long time, a variety of choice available to the consumer over the next 12 months that was not there before. And I think that reflects to a degree, Regina, that builders wouldn't be doing it if they didn't feel there was a demand. And that variety of choice will go from a 2-bed newly built terraced to a 4 or 5-bed detached on a quarter of an acre. So it's a hell of a menu of stuff that's in the pipeline.
And that's a good word, menu, isn't it? It's like, in terms of a great choice for starters, first-time buyers,
people
and
mover-uppers. Absolutely. And if you're moving here from Dublin or you're coming in from abroad or what have you, and you're in your 40s and you're in a higher financial bracket. That variety of choice wasn't there a couple of years ago. That will be there now.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's been built in Waterford for over 10 years. We've really lagged way behind the rest of the country in terms of supply, haven't we?
Well, I challenged that a little bit, Regina. There was nothing being built nationally after the crash. Banks wouldn't lend to builders at any level. Banks still do virtually no lending on development land. It depends on who you are and how strong you're structured, but they were not prepared to fund development land, which was, and mortgages, you'd need to be on your deathbed to get one at the time. So a combination of factors. There wasn't that Waterford just lagged behind. There was very limited demand. There was...
but I suppose if you look at Cork, like, obviously Dublin is another world. Like, I often compare Dublin to New York. I mean, the cranes over the last few years everywhere. And they've been building and building, and we haven't had really any construction in Waterford, but it's good news for consumers.
Yeah. No, it is. And also, one of the things that isn't appreciated to the extent that it's valid, house construction and construction generally is a huge employer of people. Carpenters, plumbers, engineers, architects, carpet men, curtain people, all of that.
And let's not forget the coffee shops, the sandwich makers,
the
supermarkets. It's a rising tide lifts all boats, isn't that
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
And we were just chatting before we came on about Dublin. I was in Dublin last week at a conference, and I was tormented by the traffic. I actually couldn't believe how bad it's got. I couldn't get a taxi because it was raining, so the whole city shuts down when it rains. So for 2 hours I was stranded. Then it took an hour and 10 minutes to get 7 kilometres to the RGS. You know, there's no public transport really. No, it's the only major city in Europe where there's no underground. Like, what are your thoughts on decentralisation and the government looking at moving some of their bases in Dublin to try and spread it out a bit, the load? Obviously, we'd like it in Waterford.
There's the aspiration and reality. They announced with a fanfare decentralisation. And if you benchmark what was announced against what was achieved, there's a hell of a difference. And like it or not, and you and I were chatting off air about this and don't entirely agree with it, Dublin is attractive to incoming industry because it's a major city. Executives want to be where there's cracking good universities and education facilities, there's theatre, there's all of that. Now, that all comes at a price in terms of housing, and they're paying an awful lot more, but it's going to be harder to get, and that's the challenge of getting jobs into provincial locations. It always staggers me. I was in Tullamore and Portlaoise recently. The vast number of people who are commuting from that distance, Mullingar, Tullamore, Portlaoise, and this is factual. This isn't, I met a fellow who knew a fellow who heard it in a pub. There are, on the hour, full trains out of those Midland towns to Dublin. That's north of an hour up, get out in Houston, take the Lewis, take the Dart, take the bus. It's an hour and a half to an hour and 45 minutes. And you were up for 3/4 of an hour before that. So Joe or Mary are getting out of the Feathers at 6:30 in the morning to try and make it to Bagot Street or somewhere suburban Dublin to a job, to be at a desk for 9 o'clock.
But at least they're not stuck in traffic like on the M50, which is a hellhole.
But that's 6 of one and a half dozen of the other. They might be stuck on the M50, but they're commuting.
Yeah.
And it is a huge wedge out of their life.
Of course.
I mean, I'm living in Ballygunner and I work myself into a lather if it's taking me more than 15 minutes to get in the morning. And I think we're spoiled rotten. And one of the advantages of provincial living is A, the house price, and B, the commute is an awful lot easier. Of course, if you get caught in the school run, it's a bit longer. But by and large, it's an awful lot easier.
It's a holiday here by comparison. I have a client in Dublin who says, Regina, how's the traffic jam at Arrakeen? I hear there's 3 cars bumper to bumper, right? So, in terms of the rental market, then I was reading on the Daft report, 25,000 build to rent units between Dublin and Cork over the next 5 years. What do you think of that?
Well, it reflects what we were talking about a second ago. It's the attraction of the major locations and the difficulty and challenge for the IDA and for Waterford in attracting jobs to these locations. And I mean, where is it going? What have you just said there? 25,000 rental units. Where is it going? Dublin.
And Cork. Yeah.
Where does that leave Galway, Limerick, Waterford? Not in the same space. And like, for better or worse, you'd have to feel that I think Dublin will continue to grow. I know the commute will be longer, more challenging, more difficult, and the prices will get dearer. But it's like most things in life, Regina, most things in life on the consumer scale are demand driven. And the greater demand is for the greater locations. And that's the proof of that pudding is the way Dublin and Cork have grown, and particularly Dublin in the last 20 years.
Yeah, well, what I don't know what they're going to do. I was listening to a radio interview this morning, a councillor in Dublin basically saying how the whole thing is massively dysfunctional. They don't have enough money in their budgets for the infrastructure. It is a bit of a car crash up there, so they're going to have to do something. According to Dave McWilliams, we have the biggest population growth since the 1800s ahead of us. So Dublin is bursting. They haven't got the infrastructure. So they're going to have to do something about spreading it out.
But Regina, it is jobs driven.
Yeah.
First, last, and always. If tomorrow morning Silicon Valley arrived into Waterford with 600-700 jobs, we'd fill it and we'd get them because why? The jobs would be here. Well, it's always jobs driven.
The Crystal Valley Tech promote 122 ICT firms, that's computing firms in the southeast. 85% of them are based in Waterford and they employ 8,500 people.
That's huge.
It's huge. So I think we've got a tradition in Waterford for pharma and tech now that's growing. And I think a lot of these tech people enjoy a certain quality of life. Yes, it's very hard to compete with Dublin and the nightlife and everything. But there are a lot of people who like not blowing their entire salary. You were talking about going up and meeting friends in Dublin and the cost of a night out.
Yeah, and they laugh at me because I whinge and bitch and moan and growl at the bill.
Yeah.
Because we're like, a decent meal and a glass of wine is 50, 60 euro.
And the rest.
And like, if you're doing your early bird specials down here before the Theatre Royal or something like that, you're in and out the door for 20 euro. It's just a different ball game. They're paid more because of Dublin. But I think it is the extra cost across the boards. Housing, eating out, commuting. But we can't argue with what's happening. The facts are the facts and the city has continued to grow.
But I think it's fair to say Waterford's open for business. We have loads of new developments in the region, 12 new developments to cater for all budgets.
There are 12 new housing developments will be under construction in calendar year 2020, varying times through the year. We're at the tail end of 2019, but in calendar year 2020, we will have 12 different schemes from Ferrybank to Tramore to Dunmore East to the Dunmore Road. And I think, Regina, it should be said, because the public wouldn't be aware of this to the extent that it's going to be valid. Waterford City Council set out to create another major location as a break from the Dunmore Road on the one side, and sort of Lismore Park, Lismore Lawn, all of that sort of Grace Dew, all of that. And that area is Kilbarry. To your watching public, it would be where Musgraves, Cash and Carry would be a landmark that they'd know, and the range, that area. There is a single development we're planning for 260 houses there. There is huge wedges of zoned, serviced residential development land, and you will see major housing in that location, which was not a residential location heretofore. And you're just off the ring road. You're a 5-minute drive to the industrial estate, the college of nursing, with all of that, and you're about 10 minutes out to the hospital, which is the biggest employer in the southeast. So that is going to be a factor in the growth in the sort of residential market in majorly over the coming years.
I think it's very exciting for Waterford, isn't it?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Now, it would be remiss of me not to ask your opinion on the rates. There's talks about Waterford Council. I think we've 5 minutes left. Do you have any questions, Stephen?
Just about some statistics on Waterford's monthly rental.
Yes.
Price at the moment.
Yeah.
How are we matching up against other?
Well, at the moment, the average rent in Waterford is €1,007. In Dublin, it says, according to Daft, it's 2,044. I know from looking myself, you'd be hard pressed to get a 2-bed apartment for less than 2,500 a month. In Waterford, the average rent for a 2-bed is somewhere around 850, 875. So obviously for tenants, yes, it's a big chunk change from your salary, but by comparison to what's going on in the rest of the country, Waterford is extremely competitive. Now, the 4% rent cap has certainly cooled the rising of rents, and that is positive because tenants have to have security of tenure. That's really, really important. You know, they have security then in their homes. I hope that answers that question. In terms of rates,
you mean municipal rates to the local authority?
Yeah, for commercial premises. What are your thoughts on do you believe
it's
that
an unmitigated tax by another name for which we get very little?
Yeah.
And the funding model that the state enforces means that the local authorities massively depend on it because it's not central government. When you pay your rates for here, they go to Waterford City Council. It's not like your taxes which go into the central fund.
Yeah.
So your local authorities are using these for various outlays that they, Waterford City Council or Kilkenny County Council, have to do. But they're very poor value for money.
Well, look, at the moment, the Waterford Council have a deficit, as you know, of 3 million, and they're talking about plugging that hole by increasing rates for businesses in Waterford. I personally think, as a business owner, it's detrimental.
So do I. And we are the low-hanging fruit.
Yes.
Right? You just shove on the rates onto the business community and sure, they'll have to pay it. Da-da. It seems unfair, it seems unreasonable, and it is very questionable. It's not very questionable. Call spades here. It is bloody poor value for money.
What are we getting?
Not an awful lot. But they're saying, well, we have a deficit and you're an easy target and we can get it from the business community, so shove it onto the rates.
And, you know, in terms of businesses, like the rising costs of insurance, like my own insurance went in 3 years ago from 4,000 to 12,000 per annum, and increases in rates, I think, will drive some people out of business.
Don't know whether they'll drive them out of business. I'm not saying you're right or wrong on that, but
we'll say small businesses, retailers, cafes, that you know, where that every single penny counts, where the owner is serving every single day and they don't have much loose change.
No. And it is very, very competitive out there, generally, the whole business climate. And I think it's unfortunate. The local authorities will say, well, it's not our fault. We must try and run at a break even. We're not getting it from central funds. It's costing us this to run the gig. And we just need more money.
Okay, we have a question from Roy Healy. Why are we building lots of houses? Why not build apartment blocks? Build up the way rather than out the way.
Because Joe and Mary, Mr. Healy, have proven time out of number that provincially they don't like apartment living for themselves. For rental, yes. For owner occupation, Joe and Mary want a 2-bed terrace, but they have a small front garden and a small back garden, and they can park the car in their own driveway. And Joe and Mary do not like living 7 floors, 8 floors, 6 floors up. And the builders, I said a few minutes ago, that markets are demand driven, and the demand has always been for your own hall door, and that's why apartments haven't worked provincially. And if there was the demand, the builders would have supplied them. You won't get that demand because they prefer their own hall door.
And I would like to see apartments to supply the rental market. Obviously, there has to be return on investment, and at the moment, the cost of building the apartments in Waterford versus the return for investors, it's just not viable. And nearly half of our society are now renters. It's into the late 40%.
One of the few, note this, he said, few bugbears that I have in this whole property thing is the rate of VAT charged by the government on new homes. I mean, you're buying your new house for 250, 260 grand. In round figures, you are paying north of 30,000 in tax. That is outrageous. It is a huge contributor to central fund, and because it's a huge contributor to central funds, they've just kept their head down and said nothing. And I don't think that there is enough outcry from the public about it.
Because they're probably not aware of it. But I suppose the question now a cynic might ask is, if 13% was reduced to 5% per se, how can the public then be sure that the builder will not inflate the prices?
There are mechanisms for doing that. Of course, the builders, being builders, will try and squeeze a few bob more onto the bottom line. But no, Regina, there are ways of doing that.
Of course there is. I just wanted you to say it.
To prevent it. But to the public at large, I think you are too quiet on the subject of the VAT take by successive governments on new homes. It's unreasonably high.
Des, I'd like to, at the end, just ask you, you were telling me about the first property you sold. How much did you sell that house for, and when was it?
1969 January, Lismore Park, 2,300. Now, before somebody in Lismore Park rings me in and says it couldn't have been, I'm virtually certain it was 2.3. It might have been 2.4. And the guy who owned
What was the currency, Des?
Pounds.
For those
and the fella who owned it got 100 quid profit and thought I should have got the freedom of the city for getting him 100 quid profit about 18 months after he bought it. I was coming out of Crow Park after an All-Ireland many years later, and a hand went on my shoulder and I could barely turn the squeeze in the crowd. And it was the owner of that house said to me, Purcell, do you think we'd get a bit more than 2,400 for it today?
Wow.
We would have done. But that was the first house, and that was January 69.
And in terms of the market, like, you've been in property, Des, for 50 years. So
look, you make this sound like I'm a refugee from Noah's Ark, and I feel a lot of the time myself I'm a bloody refugee from Noah's Ark.
I'm 23 years at it myself next year, but in terms of the cycle, people talk about the property cycle. How have you seen it? Has it gone up and down? And
we learn very little. That's one of the things I've learned, and myself included. I was furious with Des Purcell that I didn't see the crash and lost money in the crash. I mean, history repeats itself, you know, and the tide that goes out always comes back in, and we don't learn. We do not learn the lessons of history, and we certainly don't learn the lessons of history in property. And look at the crash that happened and the number of builders that went to the wall and the banks having to be rescued. Why was all that, Regina? Because we didn't read the market right. A, we were too bloody greedy, and we were all flogging it to death, all of us. And the lessons of history were very poorly learned. And at this day and age in my life, 50 years into this business, if I were back again, Regina, in the earlier years, I would have been more careful and more wary of the scale of rising prices, because it's not sustainable, and it wasn't sustainable, and that was what led to the bloody crash.
yeah, it's not healthy. And I think in terms of prices now, they seem to be pretty
Much
right.
more stable.
Yeah, much more stable. And the price of inflation in terms of second-hand properties now for sale, it has cooled significantly.
Yeah, and the longer that stability of pricing stays, the more balanced the market will be. And if we're to learn anything from property history and history generally, is that it's not madly rising prices, madly rising anything is not sustainable.
It's not healthy, no.
And it's not healthy. And it will lead to
Yes.
the inevitable crash and pain and liquidations and what have you.
Well, Des, we've actually gone over our time.
I'm
You've
amazed.
been a really interesting guest. I hope you'll come back.
Thank you.
And thank you very much. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Des.
Regina. Enjoyed it
Great.
all.
As I always say, we'll be back and up the data. Are we off air? Nearly. Yes, we could chat for ages.